Khandana bhava bandhana jaga bandhana bande tamay niranjana Janam Nararupa Dhara Nirgunam Gunamay Mochana Agadushana Jagadushana Chidhanam Kaya Gyanan Janam Vimala Nayana Gyanan Janam Vimala Nayana Vikhane Moha Jai Bhashara Bhava Sagara Chira Unmada Prema Badhat Bhaktar Janam Yugala Charana Bhaktar Janam Yugala Charana Tarana Bhava Par Jim Hita Yuga Ishara Jaga Deshara Yoga Shahaya घन समाहित मन निराखी तव कृपा भंजन दुख भंजन करुणा घन कर्म कठोर प्राणार्पण जगत तारण प्राणार्पण जगत तारण कृन्तन कलिडोर वाञ्छन काम काञ्चन अति निन्दित इन्द्रिय राग त्यागीश्वर हेम नारवार त्यागीश्वर हेम नारवार देह पादे अनुराग निर्भय गात संशय धीर निश्चय मानस वान निष्काम रान भगत शरण निष्काम रान भगत शरण तजी जाति कुल मान संपद तव श्रीपाद भाव पुष्पद वारी यथाय प्रेमार्पण दर्शन प्रेमार्पण दर्शन जग जन दुख जाय संपद तव श्रीपद भव पुष्पद वारी यथाय प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन प्रेमार्पण समदर्शन जग जन दुख जाय नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत मन वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिर्ज्योति उज्ज्वल हृदय कंदर ज्योतिर्ज्योति उज्ज्वल हृदय कंदर तुमि तव भंजनहार प्रभु तुमि तव भंजनहार नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्यमनातीत मनोवचनैकाधार प्रभु मनोवचनैकाधार ज्योतिर्ज्योति उज्ज्वल हृदय कंदर ज्योतिर्ज्योति उज्ज्वल हृदय कंदर तुमि तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमि तम भंजनहार लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंग संग मृदंग गाइछे छंद भक्त वृंद आरती तमार गाइछे छंद भक्त वृंद आरती तमार जय जय आरती तमार हर हर आरती तमार शिव शिव आरती तमार खंडन भाव बंधन जग बंधन बंदित जय श्री गुरु महाराज जी की जय। ओम ह्रीं ऋतं त्वमचलो गुणजित् गुणेभ्यः नाक्तं दिवां सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहं कषं बहुकृतं न भजे यतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छन्तयलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ति तरसां त्वयि तृप्त तृष्णां रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि राम कृष्णे मर्त्यामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्मि नाशं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारे श्रान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नाम नाथ यस्मादहं तु अशरणो जगदेक गम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीन बन्धो। ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्म स्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल माङ्गल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थ साधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टिस्थिते विनाशानां शक्ति भूते सनातनी गुणा स्वयं गुणमय नारायणी नमोस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्ति हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय नारायणी जय महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
नमः श्री यतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरय सच्चित् सुख स्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. So last time the internet connection dropped halfway through, so we'll probably resume it halfway through where we were. And the discussion that we were having, as is the theme of this particular lecture of Vivekananda, Maya and Freedom, what we have discussed so far is Maya as an existential fact, contradictions, conflicts that define our day-to-day human existence in terms of logic, in terms of our feelings, emotions, in terms of knowledge, epistemology, in terms of every facet of human existence. There are these dual pairs that define our existence. And here, why has he clubbed these two things together, Maya and freedom? Freedom that he is referring to here is freedom from these dual pairs of conflicts. Just seeking pleasure or joy as opposed to suffering is not going to yield any solution. It is this wisdom that is being hinted at. If you accept pleasure as part of life, pain necessarily needs to be accepted. It's the acceptance that these dual pairs define our day-to-day existence that comprises the first step towards a certain measure of wisdom. And the freedom that is being referred to here is freedom from being subjectively affected by these dual pairs. So, this particular lecture has these two central questions hidden in it, and the lecture itself is an attempt to answer these two basic questions. First, what comprises Maya, as in the Vedantic philosophy? More importantly, what comprises freedom? What is freedom? If you try to read or understand the Vedantic literature, by identifying the central questions that are attempted by a text, is going to give any of us who read these things a framework for trying to comprehend these books, this literature. The Upanishads, for instance, each Upanishad has a central theme, a central question. The rest of the body of the literature there in that particular Upanishad is built around that particular question as an answer to it. So we had mentioned during the last discussion that the Kathopanishad, for instance, comprises really an answer to this question of Nachiketa, Yeyam prete vichikitsa manushye asti ityeke nayam asti iti cha eke. Yeah? Basically, this eternal question in the human mind, when a person ceases to be, a loved one ceases to be, somebody we knew for a very long time ceases to be, what we call as died, does that person continue to exist or cease to exist? This is the fundamental question that is being asked. And the answer in the Upanishads is never in terms of some kind of narrative, some kind of anecdotes, some kind of stories. That is the domain of Puranas. Basically, when the intellect does not have that capacity to penetrate into the problem, to grasp what it entails. So, the answer to this particular question, whether a person exists or does not cease to exist, is addressed by Yama in this particular Upanishad, Kathopanishad, by probing that question itself and trying to find out what the meaning of that question itself is. You say a person after he or she dies. What do you really mean by dying? First question. Second, you're asking whether that person continues to exist or ceases to exist. What do you really mean by existence? There is a certain naive understanding that we have. A person does not breathe anymore, the brain ceases to function. There are all these empirical methods of determining whether a person is alive or dead. But is that really what we mean when we say that a certain person we knew very well has passed away? Do we go and measure that person's EEG or ECG or various kinds of various inputs and say that no, this has ceased to exist, therefore the person has died? No. There is a certain subjective awareness that is involved, which we do not probe. There is a certain naive understanding, oh, we will not be able to see this person doing various things, interacting with us. What is the subjective output of that interaction that we'll be missing? It is a certain awareness, a certain consciousness that this other person used to evoke in us. This subjective consciousness in us will be missing when we say that such and such a person has passed away. Not the physical reality, but our subjective reaction. For instance, in dreams we might see that same person again. It will evoke the same kind of sentiments again. So in dreams that person is alive again. But then this notion of permanence that we had in our waking life, that is gone. So when we say that a person has died, what we really mean is that in our subjective consciousness, a certain kind of depth or pleasant or existence that that person had, that awareness in our subjective consciousness is gone. A person who did not know that person is not going to be affected at all. So when we say that a person has died, it really means that that person has died to us. It is our subjective awareness that is important, not the person's objectively being around in some physical form or not. This is the first attempt to probe this question of Nachiketa. Yeah? And then the thing is, you are asking whether this person continues to exist or has ceased to exist. This leads to the second question, and it is starting where the first question left off. You're saying that this person ceases to exist in your subjective consciousness. Question: what does it mean for something to exist in your subjective consciousness? More generally, what does it even mean to exist subjectively? This is the point at which the question needs to be addressed for it to have a meaningful answer. Not some anecdotal answer, not some narrative, not some bunch of stories that the Puranas and various theological traditions across the world come up with, narratives to sort of somehow or the other blunt this force of inquiry in us. It's only the person who really wants to know the truth behind it and is not waylaid by these stories who will be able to penetrate through this mystery. Some of you might have heard of this great saint of Tamil Nadu called Ramana Maharshi. When he was a teenager, he had this experience, he had this sudden sense of a tremendous fear of his own death. For the moment, he calmed his mind and basically asked himself, what does it mean to say that I will die? And it's at that level, so the question that is being asked is not an abstract question, but a concrete question, death about one person whose existence we have no doubt about, namely ourselves. And it is there that the question is being asked of death. What is it that you take away from me? And essentially he said, okay, fine, so this body is going to die and it's going to be taken to the cremation ground, then the flesh is going to burn, then the bones are going to crumble to dust. But that which asked the question remains. The individuated existence goes. Existence itself remains. It is at this impersonal level that existence continues to be. In a very naive sense, the individual dies, the world goes on. That is something that we have no doubt about. So existence as a general fact goes on. The particular existence ceases. So, the solution, therefore, is to identify the particular with the general or the universal. It's when that identity is completely an aspect of our consciousness, of our awareness, that we can justifiably say that mortality has been overcome. This is the aim of this question. This is the resolution of this question of Nachiketa in the Kathopanishad. Just as in this particular lecture, what we are trying to discuss now is what does freedom mean? Freedom from these limitations. In particular, freedom from mortality. Not from these narratives of birth and death and cycles about which we have heard stories. Not in some theology where one is supposed to wait for doomsday. Not in some other theology where one is supposed to go to some heaven and come back through some various things. These are all narratives. In particular, they do not rest on this central faculty that Vedanta and Madhyamika Buddhism, so to speak, its mirror image, they proceed towards. The personal deity is replaced in these two aspects by this notion that we call truth. So it is the mind that is after truth above everything else that asks, what is it that dies and what is it that does not? And once you are successful in separating out these two, the answer to what is real, what exists, starts dawning in our minds and hearts. Since we have gotten into this particular theme, as I said, every piece of serious Vedantic literature has central to it a certain precise formulation of a question, and the rest of that piece of literature is an attempt to explicate that question, answer it, but more importantly, understand what the ramifications of that question is. That clarity of understanding of what the question itself entails really, and allowing us to probe into the depths of that question itself, gives us the answer. So when we ask this question, so when Nachiketa, for instance, asks this question, Yeyam prete vichikitsa manushe, the answer to that is really asking him to introspect and understand for himself what really this question means. What does prete mean? What does after having died mean? What does he continues to exist, he does not continue to exist mean? What does existence mean? It is when the mind is directed towards these fundamental issues and will not be led away from its enquiry by various anecdotes, various stories, that the strength comes to enquire into the meaning of these questions themselves. These questions, if they are genuine, emerge from a deeper aspect of our own psyche. The answer, therefore, is not to seek the answer outside, but to probe that question itself in our consciousness. What is it that I really want to know? This question being asked not of Yama, not of somebody outside, but of ourselves. So let me illustrate this, because this is actually quite fundamental, and I think if you grasp this particular theme, it becomes much more interesting and much more natural, much more alive to understand what this Vedantic literature is about. Or for that matter, if you're interested in that direction, Madhyamaka Buddhism is about. So let's just pick up a few Upanishads. So the Kenopanishad. Now we'll come back to what exactly this freedom means later on, but I'd like to illustrate this particular theme of identifying the central question. Kena ishitam patati preshitam manaha. Impelled by what does the mind do its work? Impelled by what do the senses, do the ears hear? Impelled by what do the eyes see? It's essentially asking questions of our own psychophysical self. That we see, that we hear, that we mentate, think, is something that is obvious to all of us. Take that as the starting point. What is the impelling force within us that leads us to these higher structures of consciousness? Seeing, thinking, hearing, making sense of it, making meaning out of it. What is it that gives meaning to all our existence? This is the central question of the Kenopanishad, and the rest of it is really an answer to this. The Taittiriya Upanishad. Yatova imani bhutani jayante yena jatani jivanti yam prayanti abhisangvishanti. Yatova imani bhutani jayante. From that which all these living beings emerge, in which they subsist, exist, in which they merge. What is that? This particular question, this is the central question of the Taittiriya Upanishad. So as we said, we are going to try to come up with the various central questions of the different Upanishads. I've mentioned the Kathopanishad, Kenopanishad, now the Taittiriya Upanishad. This particular thing of the Taittiriya Upanishad is particularly relevant to this Maya and freedom lecture. The answer that the Vivekananda gives here is that from freedom it emerges, in freedom it subsists or exists, into freedom it merges. And so the answer to what is freedom is search within yourself to see where your notions of existence emerge from, in what background they continue to exist, in what they merge. So this question of what is freedom in this lecture, Maya and Freedom of Vivekananda, is intimately connected to this fundamental question of the Taittiriya Upanishad, Yato va imani bhutani jayante, yena jatani jivanti, yam prayanti abhisangvishanti iti. Tad brahma, tad brahmeti, tad vijignasasva. That's the crucial important. This is the diktat. Tat brahmeti. That's this undivided consciousness. Bringhanat. That means that all pervasiveness. Tat vijignasasva. Try to know that. This is the sole instruction. Try to know that. Through this process of subjective enquiry, try to find the answer within your own consciousness. This is the central point there. Okay? So that's what? Kena, Kathopanishad, Taittiriya Upanishad. I would be remiss if I did not mention that great Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka. So in Brihadaranyaka, there is one phrase. The most important chapters there are chapters 3 and 4, what's called the Munikanda in the Brihadaranyaka. It's the largest Upanishad. In it, there is this one beautiful question, Vignataram are kena vijaniyat. Vignata, Noah. Are, how indeed? Kena, through what means? Vijaniyat, how to know the Noah. This is the central question there. What means do we have of identifying this Noah in and through all our experience? This is the central question of the Brihadaranyaka. It's a huge Upanishad, but the central part, chapters 3 and 4, are built around this one question. See, once you get the central point, the central question that a particular Upanishad is trying to answer, then the rest of the Upanishad or the rest of the literature around it starts crystallizing